Welcome to Pep Talk, where we discuss the state of Texas real estate market as it relates to property taxes. Here's your host, Paul Pennington.
Welcome, Dave Kaplan, and we're about to have a Zoom call with a bunch of stakeholders, and we're going to be talking about HB2, SB2, which just passed, and it's my understanding has not been signed by the governor yet. A brief overview: HB2,
It's SB2.
SB2 has been passed by both houses. The provisions in the bill are a $100,000 homestead exemption on school taxes, which is retroactive to 2023. If you're over 65 or disabled, it's 110,000. It has 10.7 cents of compression for the school M&O rate, and it has a provision in there to exempt more small businesses from their franchise tax. But for today, the purpose of today's Zoom call is to discuss the 5% cap provision and to discuss changes to the makeup of boards of directors, and that might have an effect on the ARB. So with all that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, David. Let's first talk about the cap that is placed on properties with a value of $5 million or less.
All right. So what the bill does is generally speaking, the bill provides that starting with the next tax year, the 2024 tax year, a property's value cannot be raised to be more than 20% of 20% more than what it had been in the previous tax year. So under the current property tax system, all properties are appraised as they exist on January 1 of a particular tax year, and then each property is ultimately responsible for that portion of the property taxes that are imposed in that taxing unit based on its relative level of appraised value to the whole. What this bill does is it says that the value of the properties that are $5 million or less, for those properties, if they're covered by the bill, that their values cannot go up to be more than 120% of where they were in the previous year, plus the value of any new improvements, new construction or things like that. And if the property is worth more than increased in value by more than 20%, that extra value will just not be subject to property taxes.
And
Now,
if you were to sell one of these properties, and if they were to sell, if they're assessed at 4.8 and then there's a sale and it's sold for $7 million, then the cap leaves.
Right. And if either of those two things happen, so if the property is whatever, a $1 million property or a $400,000 property, if the property is sold to a new entity, then the cap resets all over again. So that's one instance. The second thing is that if the appraised value is more than $5 million, then it would not be covered by the statute and it would go to its true market value. In terms of what the bill covers, it does not cover personal property. So business inventories, business equipment, those types of things are not subject to the cap. Even if they're used for business, they will be valued at market value. In addition, homesteads are not subject to, so a residential property that's used as a residential homestead, those properties will not be subject to this new cap because they are already subject to a different appraisal cap of 10%. So they're not going to be covered. So the two major exceptions to the types of real property worth $5 million or less that are not going to be covered by this new law, assuming it's approved by the voters at the November election, which I think is a pretty fair assumption, is that the homesteads are not going to be included, and also properties that are subject to special appraisal. And that's a relatively rare circumstance. It's mostly going to be properties such as open space, agricultural land, recreational park and scenic land, timber land, certain airport lands. Those are already appraised under different valuation formulas, which are not going to be subject to the appraisal cap. But mineral interests that are held in the ground, they will be subject to the cap because they're defined under the tax code as real property. Oil and gas that has been already removed from the ground and now is in storage, that's considered personal property. So that will not be subject to the cap. But other than that, it's pretty much everything else will be covered by the cap. It's worth $5 million or less.
And go on to what changes were made to the board of directors?
So you need to divide the 254 counties of Texas into two different categories: those that have a population of 70,000 and more, and those that have less than 70,000. For those smaller counties, the law is going to stay exactly the way it is today, which is that the members of the appraisal district board of directors are voted on by the taxing units that are located in that appraisal district. They vote, generally speaking, in proportion to how much taxes they levy in that county, and they get proportional voting. And they elect the members of the board of directors of the appraisal district, whose main job in those counties is to set policies and approve the budget for the appraisal district. The board hires the chief appraiser, and operates as the board of directors over the appraisal district. They don't appraise property, but they hire and pay the people and raise the funds for the people that do that. In those counties, the members of the appraisal review board, which is the body that hears and determines taxpayer protests and disputes, those members of the appraisal review board are currently nominated in those counties by the local administrative district judge. And the local administrative district judge also names the officers of the appraisal review board. So that's going to stay the same. But in larger counties, there's a pretty major difference. The members of the tax units will still nominate and elect the members of the board of directors, the body in charge of hiring the chief appraiser, setting the budget, and running the affairs of the appraisal district. But in addition to the members elected by the taxing units and the county tax assessor, who's elected countywide and sits on the board ex officio by virtue of the fact that he or she has that position as the tax assessor, there will be 3 new members of the appraisal district board of directors. They will be residents of that county who are elected in a countywide election which will be held as part of the general election. And those members of those 3 elected members of the board of directors sit on that board. And in those larger counties, the board of directors still has the same function of setting the budget and hiring the chief appraiser and administering the affairs of the district. But in those large counties, instead of the members of the appraisal review board, the body that hears protests from taxpayers, instead of those individuals being nominated and approved by the local administrative district judge, they will now be named by the board of directors, the local appraisal district board of directors, which brings things back to the way they were up until about 15, 20 years ago, when it was taken away from the board of directors. And what's really peculiar about this statute is that in addition to the full board of directors having to name the members of the appraisal review board, a person also must receive, of those 3 public members, they must receive 2 votes from those 3 public members in order to be on the board. So even if a person is approved by the full board to serve on the appraisal review board, if that person does not also receive 2 votes from the 3 elected members, they will not be able to sit on the appraisal review board.
So, to say the least, it's a whole new ball game for counties with have a population more than 70,000. So
no, absolutely, it's a big difference, and it's a long bill. It has 38 some odd pages of things in it, and there are a lot of things that are not addressed. There have been a lot of questions that have come up since the bill passed. It happened relatively quickly, and it's not there are a lot of things that are just not addressed in the bill. So certainly at the very end, the final bill that passed, it did happen. It did happen pretty quickly.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for anybody who has a question. Raise your hand, and if you don't have a camera on, I can't see if your hand is raised. So, anybody have any questions?
For David,
Go ahead, Ken.
or David or James. Let's say you've got a property that's 4 million. You qualify for the cap. Next year we raise it to 6 million. Does the $5 million limit reset every year? And are you still eligible for the cap, or does the cap go away because now you're over 5 million?
Let's see here. I know what I want to say the answer is, but I'm going to look at the exact language to tell you where it says that.
And, and I don't care what the answer is. I just want an answer.
Yeah. Well, the cap section, if you look at section B, subsection B of the statute, it says that it only applies to real property with an appraised value of not more than that $5 million limit. So,
okay. So even if you raise the market value above the 5, as long as the appraised value is still under the 5, you still qualify until the appraised value gets to 5 or over.
Exactly, because and it's a function of how Chapter 23 works, since the appraised value is the value determined by Chapter 23, and 23, the rule is the appraised value is the market value unless another section applies.
Okay.
This is another section that applies.
Okay.
So yes, that's exactly right.
I would add this, Ken, that in 2025 they're going to apply a CPI.
Yeah,
So
right. That 5 million can float up or down.
the 5 million can go up. Well, I don't think
It can go down. It never
it
will.
can
but
go
it can.
down if we have severe economic issues, but
Right.
it'll get popped up and it'll keep on. We didn't also put the caveat. This is a quote pilot program for 3 years. SOA was a pilot program.
Yep.
And David Kaplan told me that when they have the vote, because these are constitutional amendments, when they have the vote, the homestead exemption and the cap will be, you're not going to vote on it separate. You're going to vote on them together. And that in theory, this pilot program ends at the end of 2006, is 2026. Is that correct, David?
Right. It'll be right. It'll be the 2024, 25, and 26 tax years.
So I'll give you another caveat. During the Senate hearing, a senator asked a question about how much value is affected by the cap. The answer was, of all the non-homesteaded property, real property in Texas, non-homesteaded, 78% is affected by this cap. So if you add homesteaded to this non-homesteaded, the vast, vast, vast majority of property in Texas is now capped. And I think as property tax consultants will go through all their accounts, and they'll find out that the majority of their accounts are now capped. So we did find that out.
Well, and actually, someone asked me a question over the weekend, but my reading of the bill, I've not heard anyone disagree with that, is that mineral interests like oil and gas are defined under the tax code as real property. And since they're not excluded, oil and gas interests will be the beneficiary of both the cap and the special valuation provision in section 23.175 that deals with required inputs on a discounted cash flow model. So, as the market value fluctuates from, in the last several years, we've gone from $40 oil up to close to $90 West Texas Intermediate crude. So, as that value drops, the the cap will be reset, and then as the market for oil and gas increases, the resulting values will be subject to the cap. It won't be able to go up more than 20% a year.
Carl?
Hey, Paul, yeah, I'll speak to that because, you know, before I joined Terra, I was with Anadarko Petroleum, running that property tax department. So I know the mineral aspect of it pretty well. The minerals is going to be a mess because you've got royalty owners. Some of the royalty owners will fall as cap property, others won't. It remains to be seen how they're going to put those units together. Gas wells are valued by themselves. Oil is units. You wrap in a whole bunch of oil wells to make a unit. So there is nothing in there that says if you add a new well to an oil unit, is that well capped? Is the old capped? I mean, does it kick it over the 5? The whole new improvement is a problem. And does simply opening up a valve and increasing the production cause that to be a new improvement and it not qualify for the cap? And there's a whole lot of questions on the oil and gas side, and it's a mess, and operators are going to have to deal with it.
Let me ask you a question, Carl.
Sure.
I mean, you live and breathe, you're down there every day and you live and breathe this. So do you think as we progress on that, number one, they're going to see there were technical things they're going to need to address in the bill in 2025? That's the first one. The other thing in 2025, is this sustainable? I mean, insofar as the fiscal note, because I think a really good question is, and I think most people would agree with this. I got some slides from the comptroller's office that gives a history of proposed of valuations over the last 20, 30 years. And there was an uptick, in the last 3 years. And so I was thinking that had it not been, and we can blame it on the pandemic, actually, but had it not been on the pandemic, and which caused a bunch of things, but one of the things it caused, in my opinion, was an uptick in valuations because we had hyperinflation, which affected real estate. So we have hyper valuations. Then on the other hand, you had an unprecedented surplus. Had you not had the hyperinflation on real estate and this great surplus, this would never have happened, because you need this to sustain the caps, the surplus. So I guess my question to you is, moving forward in 2025, there's going to be bills for fixes in the bill, but do you see this as sustainable for like the legislature to come back and say, hey, this has been the greatest thing in the world. We need to just apply it to everything moving forward.
Because a cap is just simply a shift. It's
Right.
always going to be, they're not having to spend any money on this. It's taxpayers that are footing the bill, and it's kind of picking and choosing. And as they do these technical changes, the first thing I see them doing is like carving out oil and gas. And then what other one's a problem? Then they'll carve that one out. And so then they get into this picking and choosing winners and losers. And that's kind of what you're going to have going forward. And, honestly, my opinion in this kind of going forward and how you're going to have to look at combating this, you're going to have to change the narrative, because the whole reason this came about is everybody's complaining about their appraisals. Their appraisals is what's generating their tax bill. That's a small part of it, but it's a very, very small part of it. In the end, it's government spending that is increasing your taxes. And that narrative has to be shifted off of appraisal and put the focus squarely on these entities and their government spending and their tax rates. Until you do that, they're always going to focus on the appraisal. And when they focus on the appraisal, what are they going to want to do? They're going to want to lower the appraisal, cap it. It's not going to do anything for anybody. And that's how we got here.
I thought every year someone files a cap bill, every year, every session. And I think the reason, my opinion, I thought the reason they never pulled the trigger was because the fiscal note on the bill to do it. And I guess what I'm saying is now you've done it, and I don't even know what percent of properties are now capped in Texas, but it seems to me there is a fiscal note on this.
There is a slight one because of how school finance works, and that there is the rate for schools isn't able to free flow and move. But when we look at all the other jurisdictions, those can freely move up and down based on what the value, the certified value is. And there is a slight fiscal note, but it's not going to be, in my opinion, it's not going to move the needle. It's not going to be so astronomical that they say we can't sustain this anymore.
Well, let me ask you another question. When we were going through the process, I was always under the impression we needed $5+ billion to continue the compression that was passed in 19. Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, and that now you've compressed it more, so you're going to need X billions. Is that true?
Yes.
So doesn't it then seem that we're going to need a bunch of billions just to maintain the compression moving forward?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if there's a downturn, what happens?
Rates go back up or school finance gets cut.
Well, right. I mean, and I think, without getting into the politics of it, I will say that yes, it's true, because what happens if you look at an extreme example, for example, if you look at some of those Permian Basin counties in West Texas where 60, 70, 80% of the tax base, and hence the school district tax base, are mineral properties. You can look, it's just a function of math based, following up on, I think that was Lynn that said that it doesn't reduce taxes, it just redistributes them, or maybe Carl said it. So what you have is you have whatever the uncapped portions of the property are, plus the other taxpayers have to make up the difference in the tax rate in order to get to the revenue needed. But of course, in school districts, the legislature did not change the maximum tax rates that can be imposed by the school districts. So after the deck chairs get moved around on the ship, at the end of the day, there's going to be some amount that the school districts cannot raise locally, which they're not going to be able to raise in their tax base. And the state's going to recognize the value as being there because it's going to be in the property value study at full market value. And that difference is going to have to be appropriated by the legislature each year to make up that difference, or else there will be a difference.
And they never will, because they don't want to be seen as raising taxes.
Right.
Well, I have a couple of questions. First for Ken, and I'm having trouble with the audio, so maybe I didn't understand exactly what Ken said, but the example you gave, if I understood it correctly, was you had a property valued at $4 million and you raised the value to $6 million, and that's it didn't reset on sale, and you just raised the market value to $6 million. Why is it not going to have a taxable value of 4.8?
It is.
Oh, okay.
It is.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
That's what that's what I asked David. And David said it's the appraised value has to go over 5, not the market value.
Okay.
So Ray, you're right. It would go to 4.8.
Okay. My next comment or question, I'm not sure how to stylize it, is it seems to me like the legislature did this with virtually no citizen input in formulating this thing. And that input opportunity that we did have in the hearings seems to be largely ignored. I mean, it really didn't make any difference to them. Now, it looks like we're going to be given that opportunity, and I may be wrong, but I'll take a Pollyanna look at this. With this select committee on sustainable property tax relief that's been constituted, maybe that's an opportunity for us to really have some input going forward. And I would suggest that all of us, if I'm right about that, and if that is going to be an opportunity for people like us and others to provide input, that we get our thinking together on some of the things that we feel are important for them to consider, especially prior to the commencement of the next session.
Ray, can I comment on that select committee?
Sure.
I did find it interesting based on the invited testimony, who they invited and they didn't invite. So whether or not they're actually going to be willing to listen, I think still remains to be seen.
I don't disagree with that, but maybe that's some lobbying that we can do to the chairman and some of the members. We all know some of the members of that committee, and we can prevail upon them to try to make sure that we do have citizen input.
Well, they gave a rather hostile welcome to Carl Walker's new boss because she used the word cap, and they jumped all over her for using the word cap.
Yeah, well, that's
there is no difference between cap and circuit breaker, by the way.
Of course not.
Anyway, are there any other questions?
Hey, Paul, I had one comment that I wanted to add, and it's pretty intuitive, but obviously there's a lot of things that are going to have to be ironed out. But they did add to 4141 that you can protest the determination that the owner's property is not qualified for this limitation. So as we're working through some of the things, like what is a new improvement, like what Carl said, how oil and gas is going to be treated, or the parcel versus economic unit that you brought up. I mean, that is going to be something that you're going to need to file a protest on if you think that determination has not been made correctly.
My problem with the bill is that the Ken Nolan scenario. Ken Nolan sees the value at $4 million, raises it to $6 million. Just say it stays at $6 million for whatever reason. So when you go back to appeal that, like in an arbitration or a litigation, and you're using equity, you're not using $6 million. I mean, he's going to use $6 million because that's the market value. You're going to be using what Ray said was 4.8 million.
Now it said, David, doesn't it say equity appeals? You have to look at market value, not appraisal.
Yes, it does.
Right.
So that's the 6 million.
Right. So right. And so it's like trying to appeal a homesteaded property on equity. Well, good luck with that. Right. Because you're never going to get down to the taxable value.
David, I got another question. Is this cap like the homestead cap, where if you're below, if let's say you go up 30%, you're limited to 20, let me give an example. The way homesteads work is we get to keep adding every year till we get to the cap equals the market value. Does this work the same way on this?
Yeah. Yes. In other words, if the market value increases by whatever 50%,
right,
and the appraised value goes up by 20%, then the second that next following year,
I can add another 20.
It'll go up, right? Because it gets to go up 20% of the previous year's appraised value.
Yeah, I didn't know if it worked the same way.
It compounds a little bit, right? Like 100 would be 120,
right?
And then 120 would not be 140; it would be 144, however the math works.
Okay,
and over time, properties that are at 4 million something will come at the cap.
But if the value
say over 2 years, it will be out of the cap.
Right. If the 6 million is sustainable, right.
But it's reset on transfer, so it would go, if it transferred, it would go from that 4.8 to the 6 million the next.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
A sale construction. Yes.
Right. Or actually the next year, it'd be like Fridays on the Mickey Mouse Club. It's anything goes a day, because at that point it's where it could be 38 million. It's the 6 million goes away when the effect of the 6 million goes away. And the other thing I will say, step stepping outside the politics of it, because certainly the people, the support that the bill received in the legislature indicates that a lot of our elected representatives and the members heard from folks who thought this was a really good idea. Is that, the legislature, it's interesting special session this time. The legislature or the Senate will be meeting to consider the matters involving the Attorney General. And so there's nothing that prevents the governor from calling other special sessions to deal with issues that come up about this bill, even before the mechanics of it, even before the next regular session.
Hey, I do have a question for y'all, since y'all brought up the sale of a property. What if you sell the business and the business still continues to own the property? How are y'all going to handle? Exactly. How are y'all going to handle that? I think this is more for Ken.
Yeah, that's not a sale.
Okay.
And that's what's been going on in California for years. They don't sell the property, they sell the business, or they sell shares in the business. And that the values you never get to take the cap off.
Right.
We would not consider that a sale.
And nor should you, in my opinion, but it's something they didn't consider whenever they were going through this either.
It's sad to say. I mean, somebody sold us out. I have yet to figure out, and both sides of the fence. Somebody just sacrificed us to get some kind of property tax relief passed. And for the life of me, I can't figure out who that was or who wanted that, like the cap and the board of directors and all that stuff. Like I said, we're going backwards in time, and somebody just said, screw these guys, we're just gonna do this anyways.
Well, I think we saw CFAR saw a real support for making changes to the board of directors. And we were kind of surprised at the end of the session it didn't happen, but whoever they are, came back. And so I don't know who they are. But
the sad thing is there's only one. Tom Craddock is the only member of the legislature that served with Wayne Pivito and was in office before we have the system we have now. And the trouble is these guys don't take the time to look back on what history was, and they're going to repeat it.
I have to agree with you, Ken. I have problems with board of directors. I have problems with ARBs, but you're absolutely right. Since we had Pivito, the whole thing was not to politicize it. Right or wrong, we all agreed to that.
And you're gonna get.
You're right. You're right. They've taken a step back.
You're gonna get crap for ARB members too.
I don't know what we're gonna get.
You're gonna get worse than you got now. I'm telling you. Oh, my buddy Johnny, you're gonna get one of those board members. Hey, my buddy Johnny, he kind of needs a job, and you guys are paying X amount of dollars. How about putting him on the ARB? That's what you're gonna get.
Yeah.
And any illusion of the ARB's independence from the CAD is shot now.
Yep.
Let me address that. I had to give testimony before Ways and Means a couple of sessions ago, and I gave them the history of why we went to the administrative judge. And it started out with Fort Bend and Harris County, and then it went to other counties, and then finally it went to counties with a population above whatever it was, 125,000, and then it went to everybody. And that is a progression over a decade that we saw we needed to change how members are selected. And there's a history, and it's gone. It's gone. And you're right. I don't understand it. I don't know who was behind it, but I know that's our new reality.
Well, I think TAP has spent 35 years trying to do a couple of things. One, make sure the system is not politicized, and two, separate more separation between, or continue the separation between the CADs and the ARB. And this bill flies in the face of both of those.
Yep.
Well, another thing that's interesting about it is if you go back to when Ken Nolan was working in Nick Lampson's office, was everything was locally controlled, and the appraisal district and the legislature was tired of getting blamed for things. So the legislature comes up with a system that removes themselves completely from the process and puts things 100% in local control, and even goes so far as to, with the adoption of the property tax code, it requires that a statement go on the appraisal notice that says, if you don't like your taxes, do not talk to the legislature. Your state senate representative have nothing at all to do with your property taxes. If you have a problem with your property taxes, you need to go to the appraisal district or to the city and complain about it. And now you've been through an arc and a cycle, and now you're back where you started, where instead of the legislature stepping out of it, they're making the political move that they want to own it and take credit for the fix, and take, I guess, concurrently the responsibility for what happens when it doesn't work, when the math doesn't work at some other point in the future.
We were talking the other day how, the first thing we tell board members when they get appointed, they have no say in the appraisal process. That's not their job. But we were thinking about the other day, they do approve the reappraisal plan. So you get these 3 elected board members on there. We're not approving this. You're appraising too much property. That can happen.
The other thing is, the whole idea of having a subset of an elected board being able to stop actions of the board's majority is really interesting, because in effect, it gives almost like it really gives a walking veto for nothing else. If you have 3 elected members and 2 of those elected members say, I'm never going to vote for a ARB member nominee who's whatever his name begins with the
who doesn't cut values.
Right. All they have to do is 2 of them just walk away from that meeting. They now it's not a majority of the public members at the meeting. Right. You never need two of those 3 votes. So without that, you're not going to have an ARB.
This is probably the most consequential property tax legislation since the Pivotal bill. And again, the lack of input, and I will say this, they could have asked Tatara, hey, here's the bill, give it don't argue the merits, just take a fine tooth comb. Are we missing something? They could have gone to TAAD. Hey, it's going to happen, fine tooth comb. Are we missing it? They could have gone to TAP, and they didn't. They did it with their staff. And so it's done. And you're going to have these issues. I think 2025, you're going to have a bunch of people going to the legislature saying what we're saying right now, all these different issues. So I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but as a citizen, I wish they would have had people who deal with this every single day to at least done a fine tooth comb saying, yeah, I see where you're getting, but maybe we should write it this or have you consider it. And it was none of that. And I think that says something about us, their view of us, because they didn't ask us, any of us. Did they ask Tatara?
No, this is just a freight train, and we're a bump on the track.
Right. So, but anyway, are there any other questions before we bring this lovely, joyous?
Paul, I want to thank you guys for letting me be on this call.
Absolutely.
I will tell you, even though we're on different sides, I think we're all on the same side as far as this kind of stuff goes. Because, one, we all make a good living doing this, but secondly, I think we all believe in that we have a good system, and it's sad. Again, it's sad that they're messing with it, and I'll leave it at that.
I'll tell you something, Ken, that when we went through the pandemic, there was a Zoom call like this with probably 50 or 60 people on it. And the whole theme of that meeting was, as consultants, we had to work with the chief appraiser so they could certify the role. I mean, we're all in this together.
You guys, I've said this over the years, and I've said it when I speak at TAP. We couldn't do our job without you guys doing your job. Yeah. We would never get finished if it wasn't for the professionalism that you guys have and the way you go about business with us. And we truly do appreciate it. I can assure you.
Okay. All right. No other questions?
I appreciate everybody taking the time to participate and have a good day.
Thank you.